to begin talks toward a solution to the war in Syria. But those groups are largely seen as the aggravating forces. The U.S. didn't get invited, nor did any other Western powers. How did we get boxed out? This is a time to look at how we got there in Syria. If you go back to 2012, there was active warring between Assad and his people. Multiple allegations of him using really heinous weapons of war against his own. There became a threshold of concern. President Obama was pushed by members of his own Congress to do something about what seemed to be an incipient human atrocity. President Obama was slow at first. He wanted to be deliberate about it. He said it was complex. He then said there would be a red line that if Syria crossed in the war against his own people, there would have to be action. One of his first interviews about that red line apparently being crossed was with us about 4 years ago. Here's the crucial part of that interview. The red line comment that you made was about a year ago this week.
Right.
We know since then there have been things that should qualify for crossing that red line.
Well, Chris, I've got to say this: when we take action, let's just take the example of Syria. There are rules of international law, and if the U.S. goes in and attacks another country without a UN mandate and without clear evidence that can be presented, then there are questions in terms of whether international law supports it. Do we have the coalition to make it work? And those are considerations that we have to take into account. We're still spending tens of billions of dollars in Afghanistan. I will be ending that war by the end of 2014, but every time I go to Walter Reed and visit wounded troops, and every time I sign a letter for a casualty of that war, I'm reminded that there are costs, and we have to take those into account as we try to work within an international framework to do everything we can to see Assad ousted, somebody who's lost credibility, and to try to restore a sense of a democratic process and stability inside of Egypt.
An interesting context there. Let's bring in Bobby Ghosh, editor-in-chief of Hindustan Times. It's always good to see you, my friend. So it's interesting to hear we included the part about Afghanistan because, we thought that'd be over in 2014. Things are more complex. Now, so I pushed the president about this thing. Well, what else do you need to see? How could they not have crossed it? And he says, we got to go slow. Within about 72 hours, the president decides to do military strikes. Then what happens? We have a graphic to put up the steps in this for you. He decides to go to Congress. Okay, because Congress at the time had been saying we want a voice in these actions. They wound up not taking a vote. And that's where everything got mired down and stymied. The U.S. and the allies wound up deciding not to take military action, created a vacuum of power that's been filled by Russia and Iran. How do you see it?
Well, we dealt ourselves out of this table, and we shouldn't be surprised that there are other people gathering at the table to have discussions. Now, as you pointed out at the top of this, that these are people who are part of the problem. They're clearly not part of the solution. But we decided, the president decided early on, taking his soundings from the mood of the American people and his own sensibilities, that this is not a conflict he wanted to get into. Now,
and Congress, a persistent problem that we've had that should be highlighted in Syria. You have so many in Congress now blaming the president. The reason we wanted to replay this is he wanted to take military action. Congress said we want a voice. He went to them, they wouldn't vote. They backed out of the situation as much as anybody else.
I'm a little more skeptical about that, Chris. If he really wanted to take military action, there are ways to present an overwhelming amount of evidence. This is kind of the opposite of what happened during the Bush administration with Colin Powell going to the United Nations and presenting what we now know to be false evidence. This president didn't go to the United Nations to present anything, didn't go to the court of public opinion to present anything. No conclusive, convincing evidence was presented, although evidence existed. The White House did not make a full-throated attempt to make the case for war. Now, we can argue that there were good reasons for that, but that's what happened. It's easy to now say, well, Congress didn't want to have a vote, but I don't think the White House really
debate it.
Yeah, they didn't debate it. I don't think the White House really pushed very hard. As we know, this president can, when he's moved by events, reach over Congress and talk directly to the American people. That's the prerogative of presidents throughout the history of this country.
I'm just saying you have to include that, one of the ongoing problems we have, and the president-elect is going to have to deal with it now, Mr. Trump, when he takes over, Congress declares war under the Constitution.
Right.
They consistently wimp out of that responsibility. Syria was an example of it. So now you get the ripple effect of this. What have we seen happen in Syria because of the U.S. and allies not being there in a more impressive way?
Well, now, as he said, there are costs and there are consequences. There are costs to action, there are consequences to inaction. The consequences to inaction, and you can't blame all of this on President Obama, but the consequences are 500,000 Syrians are dead, millions of Syrians are displaced, ISIS is more powerful than ever, Russia is more powerful and sort of a bigger actor, Iran is a bigger actor. All of these are consequences of the United States and the Western power, not the Americans alone, stepping away from the stable and saying, we're out.
And the president-elect and the current president seem to agree on this point of that President-elect Trump does not want to go into Syria, does not believe we should be in the regime game, and questions Assad's legitimacy in a positive way more than Obama ever did.
That's right. Obama at least identified Assad as the bad guy. With Donald Trump, we're not sure who he regards as the bad guy among the many actors. We know he thinks of ISIS as the bad guy. Everybody agrees on that. But he doesn't think of Russia as being part of the problem. His views on Iran are up and down. His view on Assad is not entirely clear, and I'm not clear whether he actually has any views on Turkey. But President Obama, this was part of the problem. He identified Assad as the bad guy. He said Assad has to go. When the President of the United States announces to the world that a dictator has to go and then doesn't follow through, there are consequences to that, to how the world begins to perceive American forces. The reason why Putin was able to step into this is that he saw that Obama was not going to step into.
Bobby Ghosh, appreciate the perspective. Thank you very much.
Anytime.
Allison.
President Obama putting pen to paper on a new round of executive orders. Will they impact how history remembers his 8 years in the White House, or will they immediately be overturned? That's next.